Well, hello and welcome to the launch of SyrphBoard, an online platform for recording hoverflies. I'm Andy Murdock, and myself and a colleague, Yanis Sophos from Maplume, have been working with the Hoverfly Recording Scheme led by Roger Morris to create this platform. I should say that this talk was originally an online meeting, but due to an issue with the recording, we're running it again. And so what we've tried to do is Roger and I will take you through the background to the project. We'll give a demonstration, and then we'll also aim to address the questions that were presented at the live event. So yeah, at that point, I'm going to hand over to Roger Morris to give you the background to the project.
Okay, right. Thanks, Andy. I think I'm. Great. That's good. Okay, let's just take ourselves back a little bit. The Hoverfly Recording Scheme has been running for goodness knows how many years, since 1976. It's been very active on, certainly on the Facebook group, for some 8 years now, 7, 8 years. And the numbers of records coming in have increased dramatically. One of the things that we haven't been able to address, though, is that whilst you can create a data set that tells you where things have been recorded, it's very difficult to record occasions when people have gone out, they've looked for things, and they've not seen anything. And likewise, it's extremely difficult using the data management system that we use, a thing called Recorder, to actually have a standardized way of recording weather and time. So last year, I was very keen to try to find a way of particularly recording nil returns. The reason for that being that in very hot weather, we can go out and we don't see anything or very little. And I think that there is a good correlation between that lack of seeing anything and the conditions at the time. On top of which, although there's been some work done on the times of day that hoverflies fly, the early work, which was done by Francis Gilbert in the 1980s, seemed to stick pretty much to his working day, in other words, 9 till 5. There's more recently, there's been a little bit of work done by Nathan Med, who has not published his work, where he actually went up to dusk, started at dawn, went up to dusk, and he got some very interesting results. Now, we don't have access to those results. They should be published, but Nathan has not got round to doing so. So we've been thinking for a long time about how we can record nil returns and understand better, or try to understand better, how insects, and in particular hoverflies, behave over the full day. So the idea originally was that when I put out a call for someone to come up with a system where we could record this, was that we could use a crowd approach to finding that information. So I put out that call, and Andy and Yanis came back with a very generous offer and said, we think we can do something to help. And they've been working very hard since then to come up with a recording system. Now, the other side of my wishes at the time was that it's very easy to have a recording scheme that tells you or gets people to send records in, but they can be a bit of a black hole. And you get lots of records in, you might see a map come out eventually. You might even see something like, the Big Butterfly Atlas, or there've been other projects of that nature, either at a national or a regional level. But there's very little interactive stuff, and yet people still want to be able to know what's been seen near to my house, what's been seen on my patch, what's been seen this year, and all manner of things like that. So for a long while, we've wanted to be able to give people feedback and make the recording scheme much more a facility for people as much as a facility to put records in. So it becomes a virtuous circle. You put records in and you get something out of it. So that's where we stand at the moment. Andy and Yanis have been working very hard to come up with something, and we're at the point now where we think there's a mechanism at least to start using it for putting records together. Lovely, thanks, Andy. So we have a SyrphBoard, and I believe the name is attributable to Steve Suthill, who came up with
That's right.
the name, which is it's excellent. It really is. I really like it. So anyway, the idea is that we've got a platform. It's not intended to replace or duplicate existing systems. There are things such as iRecord and iNaturalist that if people want to use them, they can. There's no problem there. It won't replace the Facebook group, quite the opposite. It actually works with the Facebook group, and Andy will describe that in due course. But the idea is that there would be an online platform that would allow us to capture and store records securely online. Now, that's been something that has concerned quite a lot of Facebook group members. They've kept their records on spreadsheets and have been terribly concerned that if their computer crashes, and it has for some people, then they might lose their records. So that's a great step forward. It will capture nil returns. Now, we won't be able to drag those into the recorder database, but we will be able to access them in a manner that makes analysis possible. And that's really, really important. It'll capture other information, times of day, weather. It'll even be possible to record other observations of other insects. And we can make those records available to the relevant recording schemes. Hopefully, it will make data entry easier. For some people who use spreadsheets at the moment, it could be a lot easier. It will also make sure that a lot of the variability in the entries on a spreadsheet are resolved. I spend an awful lot of time actually cleaning up data sets, making sure that the names are the right names, spelt correctly, because if they're not spelt correctly, then they don't go into the data set without a lot of messing around by Stuart, who then has to match them to names, whereas otherwise he can do it automatically. With any luck, it'll mean that data get into the recording scheme more quickly, although I have to say that's very much down to when Stuart's available to upload into the scheme. But nevertheless, it's potentially a much faster system, because we will be able to pass data as and when needed, really. And of course, the important thing is the feedback to recorders, which I've already discussed. So at that point, I think I hand over to Andy to tell you more about it.
Thanks, Roger. Yeah. So we've got to the point now, and thanks to the Facebook group, we've been able to work with people who potentially use the system to really understand what people would like to see in it. So this is very much release 1. You know, it's a first version that we hope to build on in the future. But as Roger described, it's an online system. You log in with your Facebook username and password, and as I said, there's lots of potential wish lists for this, but this is the first release. And what we've tried to focus on in the first release is to replicate all of the spreadsheet sort of data capture requirements. So everything that's in the spreadsheet, we can replicate with the system, but we've also added a lot more. So based on what Roger was saying earlier, the ability to capture nil returns, the ability to input information about weather and time. We've included some novel visual data entry tools that make it quicker to enter the data and to find species faster and things like that. We've also significantly added the map tool to the data entry, so you can now click on the map to automatically pull back the grid references and vice county, and also save frequently visited sites. So I'll show you some of that in a minute. The other thing is to be able to back up the data and I'll allow export of the records out. You know, these are your records essentially, so you know, we don't want to keep hold of them. If you want to take them out to plot them in another system or do your own analysis in Excel, then we've got facilities to do that. But as I say, it's very much a first release. We've got loads in the pipeline that we'd like to do. We need to talk about what we're going to do next, but I'll show you what we've got now. Okay, so first things first, let's come out of the slideshow and into the system itself. So as I said, you log in via Facebook, and what you're immediately presented with is the summary of the record. So this is going to evolve into a dashboard, but for now, all we have is a very simple summary of the number of species that have been seen. You know, it's ordered by species, number of records, and the count if we've provided numerical sort of totals for the observations. So as I say, we want to expand on that, but for now, this is just a summary of everything that's been seen. And you know, we want to add things like filters so you can search by site and so on. The next tab is the summary of all the records that we have. So if we click to expand any of those records, you can see the information. And as in the spreadsheet, you've got the number, the gender, the method of observation, verification if it's been made, notes, and hyperlinks. So depending on the record and the status of that, we might have even a hyperlink to the original Facebook post that verified it. So in this case, you click out to that, it goes to the Facebook post where Chris has said, you know, that he's happy with the identification. So that's quite a useful process. So the main way that we would enter a new set of data is go onto the add button. We then automatically get our details entered based on the login. So I'm logged in as my Facebook ID. It knows I'm Andy Murdock. We can choose a date using this date selector. If we want, we can specify a time, which is one of these new things that Roger was after to help us increase or some of the resolution at times. So you can enter a time slot, either a single time slot, or you can enter a period by entering the start and the end. So this is recording from 7 till noon in the morning. The ability to add weather conditions for the day. So for the recording session I did today, say it was clear skies, and on my kitchen thermometer it was 12.2. Then what we have is this new form, which is for entering the map-based information. So I also already have existing sites defined. I can define new sites, but if I just go to an existing one for now, I click on the map, it zooms to my location, and then in order to confirm the location that I want to enter, I click on the map. So if I click on there, it automatically updates the grid reference and automatically updates the vice county. And if I were to go to Snettisham, which is another place I record, then you can see that it actually zooms to the extent of all grid references that are associated with that name. So it's a quick way of getting to a general locality, but you can then enter a completely different grid reference if you want, and this will then update to the relevant area. So it's automatically taking all that pain out of getting the wrong grid reference, getting the wrong vice county, and so on. You don't have to do that. After that point, do you then have you're then required to enter observations. So if it's been a bad day and you've not seen anything, you can just hit nil return. But more likely, or you know, hopefully, we will see some species. So we've got this tuned a list of species to enter. So this is based on 3 tabs. There's the Hoverfly Recording Scheme Top 20, and then once we've been entering information, we can also then have our recent records. So if I click on this is the recent records that I've entered into the system. And then there's also another one where it's just, you know, where we can't get down to species level or genus maybe, then there's the option to choose from one of these. And the idea is that we will use those to quickly find a species. So if I just enter a couple now, So we say, I don't know, today it's sort of episurface balteatus. It creates this new row where we can then add further information. So the number, if it's a male or female, how have we observed it? So was it a photograph? Was it a visual sighting or a specimen? We can click on that. If somebody's verified it, I can choose the verifier, or I can set it to not verified if it's just a visual sighting. I can enter information in the comments about what it was doing. So, you know, this one was hyacinth flowers. And also I can go to the to create a Facebook link. So say this was the post that I was linking to, I can drop that in there and then save it. So the idea is that you go through, and for all the species you see on that particular day, that you can then enter things. So, you know, I might go here and find another one, go through visual sighting. If I've got anything else to add, I can add that in. Alternatively, if you if they're not in if you see something a bit more unusual or something a bit more scarce, then you can type that in the box. So, you know, I might type in Pilosia, can't spell, but you basically can then choose from all the Pilosia species in the list. So let's just pick one that might be likely at a certain time of year, maybe. You click on it and then just go through the same process again. So it's, you know, if it's a male or female, you know, to identify some, we need a photograph, we need it verifying, etc. We can post a link again. And that works on both the sort of the prefix and the suffix, the first part and the specific part. So you could type in, you know, if you're looking for Pilosia pubera, then you can type that in and you would immediately come into that and select that, add in whether it was a male or female. That one's likely to need a specimen and probably need Roger. So basically that's how you build up the list of the observations. So up here we're gathering all of the information on the recording session itself, and these are all the observations about the that we've seen on that particular day. And then what we do is then just click save, and then we should start to see the species list update in the summary, but also in the records, you'll see that we then have all of those records available. If we make a mistake, that's fine. We can just go in and edit any of this. So you can go in and change the date or the time or the species and so on. If you want to, if you actually saw two of these and you had it entered like this, but it was a male and a female, we can't, at the moment we need a separate record for each. So you can simply just duplicate the record and then add a male, drop this down to one each, and then you can submit that record. And equally, if you want to remove anything, then you can just simply click on these minuses to remove the records there that way. And then what you do is update, and then again go back into your records, and you'll now see that it's only got two. So it's all working nicely. It's right into an online database. It's all secure, and the other good thing is that you're also then able to export the data out. So if you wish to at any point, we can export the data out in the same format that the current spreadsheet uses. And you see the data are formatted as such. And obviously the most recent records first, these ones I just entered, you can see. And also we've got these the various links embedded, and then the new fields you can see have also been populated. So we haven't implemented the time one yet, but we will do very soon. So it's been stored in the database, it's just not exporting at the minute. And then you also have this ability to use Google Maps to view from the spreadsheet directly. Now the idea is, though, that if you're using the system, you wouldn't. If you're normally a spreadsheet recorder, you can still continue submitting your spreadsheet, but it wouldn't make sense to use a spreadsheet and this. The idea of this export is really if you wanted to do something with your data outside of the platform. You know, we don't want to hold on to the data and stop you using it. If you want to share it or do your own analysis with it or visualizations, then that's fine. That's what this tool's for. So yeah, that's broadly the current functionality as we have it. This obviously will be improved to include more summary information. You know, we might be able to see the number of sites and various other things. Here we're going to show more at the click, so you might have a little thumbnail of a map. And then in the add data, we have the potential to add other information, but I'll come back to that in a little while. Okay, so I'm just going to go back into the presentation. So I mentioned that this was the first of you know, a longer process of generating a system. You know, these things don't get delivered you know, in one go. Usually we tend to take it in stages. So we know that we've got some things on our roadmap already, that things that we'd really like to do, we would have loved to have included, but you know, when they're now going to be in the next release or in subsequent releases. And they are things like, you know, the ability to add an aerial photo to the grid reference selector, just so if you're in the middle of nowhere and there's no real obvious features or place names, that you can use the aerial photo to guide where you put your grid reference location. We know that we need to add statuses to the record so that it's clear whether that record has been approved for upload to the Hoverfly Recording Scheme database. At the moment, the way that it works is Roger gets a export of people's spreadsheets. He then goes through those spreadsheets and checks for if there's any issues. If there's any issues, he might send a query back. What we want to do is, rather than wait till the end of the year for that, we want to present Roger with a subset of records that have been entered into the system that have been submitted in draft, sorry, have been originally created in draft, then submitted for consideration. And then Roger can then either verify that they're correct, you know, maybe being guided by whether they've been verified on Facebook, etc. And then either you know, verify them as correct or go back to the user with a query. At the moment, that would be done outside of the system, but there's no reason why we couldn't do that querying process within the system. We could flag a comment against a record like you do in iRecord, say, or something like that. And then ultimately, the idea is to get all of the records that are currently approved in a routine that will export them to Stuart and the Hoverfly Recording Scheme main database, so that those records can be periodically exported out and ingested and used in the main system. So rather than waiting for spreadsheets to come in January after everyone's submitted up, finished using them and completing them, the idea is that they would be periodically take a snapshot from the system. We would flag all records that are exported so that every new export only included new records. So that's one of the other things that we're very keen to get in place sooner rather than later, so we can actually link the data up. It doesn't matter in the short term really, because we have the ability to do that manually. It's a relatively small number of records, but yeah, we want to make that process slick. And then during the feedback, we also had some really interesting comments about, you know, capturing the information about early stages. So this is larva and people who rear larva, and there currently isn't a standard way of sort of documenting that or querying it and analyzing the data. It's kind of you know, it's really useful, and you know, it's some of the key stuff. You know, some species you just don't see as adults as easy as you do as larvae, so rearing really helps with all of that. And so came up with this concept of this is a mock-up which we'll be discussing with early stages people, you know, the rot holers and people who are interested in larvae, and basically the idea is that initially you would submit a record as you know, whatever you collected on the day as larvae. So in this case, it's 4 surface species larvae, and they're entered into the system. What we want to do is then split those out into 4 separate sub-records that allow you to then capture that information as the rearing process continues. So, you know, collected on 11th of October, say, last year, its provisional identification was as a surface. That then pupated on this date, it emerged on that date, and then, you know, the outcome was that this adults emerged rather than died or whatever the other options are. and that then it was confirmed as Surface vitrepennis. And then the idea behind that is that we can then finalize the record from what we originally had as a rather generic record, and basically then if we were to finalize that record, it would knock this total down to 3 and actually create a brand new record for Surface vitrepennis, and then retain all of that larval rearing information. And then, there's also scope to obviously add to extract information on what the current rearing status is as well. So but the key thing about this is, up until the point that it's finalized, that record stays in draft, so it kind of sort of goes back to that the importance of that that status that we need to add. The other thing that we wanted to look at was the ability to create a data extraction user. So currently the data extraction team take records from Facebook, put them into the spreadsheet, and then it's the spreadsheet that gets uploaded into the Hoverfly Recording Scheme database. Yanis thinks that there's definitely potential to be able to do that in a more automated way, and it could be that we can either generate something that allows the data extraction team to record on behalf of another user. So effectively take what they see in Facebook, but enter it as if they were the other person, the person submitting the post. So that's one thing, but as I say, Yanis thinks he can do something a bit more sophisticated than that, where it might be that we can use the system to generate a formatted post, and that then when, say, Chris or whoever is verifying it reviews it, there's a means of knowing that and then referring that back to the system. So that way we use the intelligence of the system and some clever IT to connect the two, but we're not removing the kind of interactivity of Facebook and the ability to sort of interact and comment and do all the things that make the group so vibrant. So I think that's something we need to explore a bit further, but it's really exciting in terms of, again, improving that data quality and making it possible to extract things automatically. And, when in very busy periods, that could be quite a saving potentially. At the moment, the mapping and dashboards that we've put onto the system are purely about data entry. So they're not designed for interactivity and showing all your records. It's merely to help you guide the location entry. But what we plan to do is obviously aim towards getting an interactive map where you could maybe filter by species, look at my species versus all the Hoverfly Recording Scheme species, be able to play around with the phonology and what things are occurring where. But then the other thing is the sort of the dashboard element. So this idea of having, for my records or all records, total numbers, total species, number of sites, total records, days with records, etc., nil returns. But then also the ability to break down. So what's the phonology for Bacca elongata typically? How does that compare to my records? What's my first record, my last record? And then do that by year. So there's lots of potential here, and this is the really exciting bit that we're keen to get onto, but we've had to go through the data entry part and focus on that initially to make this possible. So this is what we're going to be focusing on next, hopefully. But yeah, there's a huge opportunity around this to do really cool stuff and provide feedback to users that will hopefully encourage them to submit more and more records. And then obviously part of that might be to bring in records from the existing HRS database. So we know that we can identify users if we want to. They're anonymized at the moment, but we could work out a way to link records that have been submitted, and if people give permission to actually share their data with the system, so that they can then view it in that system. They wouldn't see other people's records at the moment. It would purely just be an anonymized view of all the other data. But for their own data, going back several years, I know I've only been recording for nearly 3 years now, but I do have records in the main database as well as spreadsheets and this system. So it will be possible to bring all those together if I were to give permission to have it loaded. So there's a little process around that, but that's really exciting as well, because it allows all those historical records to be brought in and shown in one place. Okay, so now the crucial question, how do I actually access SyrphBoard? Well, basically you just go to this URL, which is slightly different to the one we were using in the test version, although it should redirect. So if you're using hoverfly.maploom.com, then you should be redirected. But yeah, the official new URL is surfboard.maploom.com. Okay. And basically, once you go there, you'll be able to log in using your Facebook username and password. So yeah, it should be fairly straightforward. If you do have any problems, you can email us at support@maploom.com, and that's also the initial first place to contact if you've got any queries or problems. But I guess you can also use the UK Hoverflies Facebook group too. Yeah, so basically, let's just very quickly touch on next steps. So the plan is that we've now got the system in place in time for launch for the main 2020 season. Hopefully we can backfill records if we've got those already, if we're lucky enough to have some records. And then basically what we're going to do from this point is to promote the SyrphBoard platform to the group. We're going to include it in the welcome pack so that people can pick and choose which system they want to use. But SyrphBoard will be one of the options, and we hope that currently everyone who's using the spreadsheet will see some real advantages of using this system. So yeah, let's see how that goes. And as we obviously use the system over the next period, we'll hopefully get some further feedback and suggestions for improvements. And we know that we need to work on the cosmetics and things like that. And yeah, and Yanis and I will have various things to do on the maintenance and update, and things like FAQs and bug fixes will be updated from time to time. So yeah, that's the main initial activity. But at some point we need to agree what the future roadmap priorities are for release 2. As I said, this is only a first version. We want to really start to focus on these dashboards and mapping, interactive mapping, so that we can provide the feedback element that we know people are going to be really interested in. So yeah, that's the state, and yeah, we'll be looking at that in the next month or so of what we're going to be doing next. Yeah, so then just before we move on to the questions, just a very quick thanks. So yeah, thank you to everybody on the Facebook group who's provided feedback on the system. We've had about 20 people using the system and providing feedback, so it's really much appreciated. As Roger said earlier, thanks a lot to Steve Suttle for coming up with the SyrphBoard name very at the 11th hour, but we think it's brilliant and it's exactly the sort of thing that's needed. So so yeah, that's ideal. And yeah, and just a bit of a shout out to Yanis Sofos because he couldn't attend the call or the meeting. So we just wanted to say a big thank you to him because he's the one who's been the technical lead for the project from the Maploom side. So yeah, thanks very much for listening. We really hope you enjoy the platform, and then we're going to be back very shortly with some of the Q&A bits that people have raised. Okay, so we also on the day of the session had a number of questions from people, and Roger and I were really keen that we kind of captured that in this video as well. So I'm just going to, we're going to run through some of those together. So one of the questions was about the fact that can the map be used to view all my records? Currently, it's only on the edit page. So that's a really good question. Essentially, at the moment, we've got to a point where we've got the data entry tools working, but we haven't provided the sort of interactive mapping and dashboarding. And so very much that's going to be something that we want to be front and center of the system. This is key to the feedback that we were talking about, but we haven't developed it yet. So you'll see that coming in the future. So that's the first thing. I don't know if you've got any more to say on that, Roger, but the sorts of things that I wanted to include on that were things like the filtering and so on, yeah, by species and change over time and so on.
Yeah, I think it's probably worth saying that, we are working towards something rather than actually launching an absolutely perfect system, and things will change over time, and it's just in the nature of things that if it's being done in addition to the day job, then it can never be done at the same speed as the day job. So let's be positive about we're moving in the right direction.
Yeah. Obviously, I've vested interest in making this happen because it's going to help me out in my recordings. Yeah, the next question was a bit more on the sort of rationale for recording. So I think this one's for you, Roger, and it was to do with if I often record over a long walk, how would I handle nil returns when there are many grid references along the route? So
yeah, this is always going to be a bit of a problem, and dealing with long walks is always a challenge. So the way I would look at it is that when I do a long walk, I break the walk into 1 kilometer units and just literally record at a 1 kilometer level. Now, clearly, if you did a long walk and you didn't see anything through the whole time, then really there's no point in trying to break it down into 1 kilometer units unless you've actually recorded the time that you've been in that unit. Now, that makes life pretty challenging. So my gut feeling is that if you did a long walk and you didn't see anything between, let's say 9 and 11 or 11 and 1 or whatever, then a single record would probably suffice. What we've been thinking about nil returns as a whole, pardon me, has been about having days when we can perhaps get a whole lot of us to try and record over the day, so that maybe we go into our gardens or a nature area or whatever, and record at regular intervals. So that will work much better for the nil returns. The idea being that we would actually have a group exercise, and that the results of that group exercise would be much more constant. I'm going to write some guidance on this, but I think what I would say at this stage is that I would focus on the idea of, if you're recording your garden on a regular basis, then and you go out and there's nothing there, then that's great. 9:15, nothing there. 10:15, nothing there. 11 o'clock, there are X number of species. 3 o'clock, there's nothing there, or maybe there is something there. That sort of thing works really, really well, and that would be the sort of thing that we'll be able to make something of the records. Intermittent, odd records of not seeing anything, I think, are probably going to be very difficult to actually interpret. Yeah. So, whilst I'll write the guidance, I think the important thing is to think about the nil return as something that we can do as a group project. And that will provide us a lot more feedback. It comes back to what I was saying at the beginning, that what we don't have is a real handle on the way hoverflies behave between dawn and dusk. We know what happens roughly between 9 o'clock in the morning and 5 o'clock in the afternoon, but there are two ends, and certainly the evidence seems to suggest that, for example, on hot days, activity picks up in the evenings when it's a little bit cooler. But we need to do some work on that.
So that's about collecting enough data, I suppose, to be statistically robust, but trying to capture that as in a more coordinated way then. So I think that sounds good. So we'll look out for the guidance on that. In terms of the next question, we kind of covered that in the video earlier, so I'm not going to dwell on that, but it's about how you enter sort of two different genders for the same species. One thing that I would like to talk about, though, is there was a question about whether there's a limit on the number of sites that can be added to the Zoom to tab. So if I come out of the presentation and go into the platform, let me bring it up. So the idea is that this allows you to generate new sites. So if I was, I don't know, up in Lancashire, say, where my folks live, I might add a new site for Lytham, and you basically can just enter it in, and when you click on the map, you get a new grid reference and so on definition. If I was just saying, in this case, it was a nil return just for speed. But the idea is when I go back into that ad, I've now got a tab for Lytham, and this will grow and grow until you run off the page. And the idea is that you'll scroll down so you can jump to the relevant thing that relevant extent that you're interested in. But I think ultimately, if this grows into a massive list, we might have to do some sort of ordering, or, you know, like we do with the other things, have a recent tab or some way of searching by a specific name. But for now, we're just going to let you scroll them. But yeah, so I just wanted to show that because we hadn't really covered that in the video so far. Coming back to the questions. So if I enter my records in SyrphBoard, do I still need to submit a spreadsheet to HRS? Well, I think the idea is that if you're using the SyrphBoard platform, you know, the idea is the records will be picked up from there automatically once we get these statuses in place and the verification process. So it wouldn't really make any sense to submit in the system and submit a spreadsheet, because, you know, it's essentially duplicating. The idea of the export function is more about making your records available to you outside of the platform so that you can use them for other things. So I don't know, a lot of people do their own analysis maybe, or want to plot things in other systems. That's perfectly fine. We've included a function to allow you to do that. The next one was about, can I choose to export only those records that I've not exported before? At the moment, no, we only allow you to just export everything, and because it's fairly easy in Excel to sort and to extract the records you want. But there's no reason why in future we can't add a few filters on the export function that would allow you to take, say, only the latest records, or you know, all records for a particular year or particular site or species. So we haven't done that yet, but it's quite simple to do, and we'll probably include that in a later release. Similarly, somebody asked, they've got a load of records already for 2022. Can we upload them now? Well, not at the moment, but again, we can do something in the back end, and possibly in future we could allow the update of including upload of spreadsheets, but it's not a priority, and probably it presents some problems in terms of potential duplication and so on. So at the moment, if you've got large numbers of records, we can probably upload them in the back end. But as I say, because we're now in time for the start of the season, hopefully that's not a big issue. The next question was on about, can we use Facebook to generate a location via a map? So I essentially provide this information via the Facebook group. We're not aware that you can do that without an app like the SyrphBoard platform. So at the moment, it's not really possible for us to scrape the existing posts, because they have to be very, very strictly formatted. And even though we tell people, you know, they have to provide things in a certain format, it's very unlikely that they always would be. And so we basically, we aren't able to do that automatically. One thing we were looking at, though, potentially was the ability to potentially upload a post from the platform that's formatted in a certain way, which then the group could then interact with. But then also, when the post was verified, the ID was verified for a photo or a particular post, then we might also be able to detect that and feed that back into the status. Now, there's quite a lot of complications around that potentially, but Yanis and I are looking at it. But it does have the potential, Roger, I think, to sort of ease that process a little bit and maybe make it a bit more efficient to get records down from the platform.
Yes, I mean, I think it would be wonderful to get to that stage, but I can imagine the programming element being extremely complicated, and on top of which I think it'll be further complicated because there'll be a need to understand, when someone's given a name and it turns out to be wrong, how do you go back and resolve that? Yeah. So I think for me, that's one which I would put very much at the back end until we've got a lot more experience of how well this works. Yeah. And I don't really want to create something that actually, in the end, creates more work rather than less work. Exactly. I think that's where we need to be. Let's look at this as a system that okay, it can't do absolutely everything. The big danger with all systems is that you start with one idea and it evolves, and then a dozen people say, but I'd quite like to have X or Y. And of course, that's exactly what we've seen, for example, with the NHS. And you end up with a system that doesn't work. So my argument is simplicity, and let's accept that sometimes we can't do things.
Yeah, and I think that's also true of the feedback that we had from this time. You know, the 20-odd users who looked at the system gave lots of feedback. We can't incorporate everything, and you know, we try to focus on the common requirements and the things that really make a difference. But you know, it's not to say that we haven't considered including things. So if you haven't seen it, it's not because we're we don't think it's a good idea necessarily. It's just we have to prioritize, and you know, things will, even as we move forward with the next release, we'll have to decide what functionality we're going to go for next as the system evolves. So yeah, we're looking into what's possible on that, but it's kind of more of an exploratory thing for Yanis and I to see what's possible, you know, from our own perspective as a company. You know, we're quite interested in how you interact with Facebook, so you'll benefit from some of that. We also had some comments. So yeah, we've got work to do on these early stages, but the initial proposals look quite positive, so that's good. The other thing was I forgot to show you the search functionality for grid references. So I just want to nip out again and show that. So we have, I think I logged out actually. So there's another function in this tool which I didn't mention, where if you know a grid reference and you want to look it up, you can add it into here. Now these are just appearing from the web browser, just remembering them. But if you type in a number on the map, it starts to zoom to those coordinates as you enter. Then once you get to the desired location, you click on that and it will update the device counting, and you could give it a site name. This is quite interesting point. Obviously, this is what I was talking about earlier on the video about you know, the lack of context in some places. So this is why we want to have an option here to switch to the aerial photo view, so you can position yourself a bit more closely. So that will again be coming quite soon. That's something that's quite high up on our list, to add that in so that you can position those points a bit more easily. So I think that was it. The final point though was on this the idea of self-verification. So I mentioned that what we want to get to a point is to have these different statuses of records in the system, and the way that Roger does it at the moment, and Roger, you can perhaps explain this a bit more, but essentially at the end of the year, people submit their spreadsheets, and then you look over them and decide whether you want to ask a question about them, or you decide whether it's correct and verify. Yeah. That's correct, isn't it? That's how it works.
Well, I think what I would say is that if a record has been submitted where it's been posted on Facebook and someone else has seen it, and the person that's seen it is logged, and I think they're likely to be right, then I accept the record. I'm not sure I'd call it verify. I think I would simply say that it's as far as I can see, there's no reason to doubt it. The other half of those records, and this happens with all of us, including myself, we make identifications in the field using the experience we have, and therefore we're not the verifier, we're the determiner. So if you actually look at the columns, you have a recorder and you have a determiner. Now, where things have been verified on Facebook, I would regard those as the determiner, because they are the last person to have made that identification. However, where someone has been making their own determinations, I would go through and I'd be looking at the records and saying, do these make sense? Now, you know, if it was someone with very little experience, and their list comprised things like Episurface Boltiatus and, I don't know, Aristalis Tenax and one or two other things, I'd be saying, yeah, they're identifiable, so I can accept those records without any trouble. If they are relatively inexperienced, and you then see the list contains things that I know are going to be difficult or can't be done unless you use microscopy, well, I'm fairly likely to challenge it and say, have you got a specimen? And that's the normal process. What I also do is, and this doesn't so much apply to the Facebook group, but it does apply to some data that I get, is I look at things like what does the list comprise? Because you get a measure of the ability of the person, and then if you look at what the list comprises and where they are, does that make sense as well? So one of the things I quite regularly pick up is sets of records that quite clearly are wrong, because the records are from central England and the species referred to are almost entirely coastal, not totally coastal. So you inevitably do some of that sort of thing. But from the point of view of entering records on SyrphBoard, the really important thing is that there will be some records that are verified stroke determined by, for argument's sake, Chris Sellen or Mick Chapman on Facebook, and therefore you list them as in the second column. There'll be others which you've done yourself and you've done perfectly adequately, so your name goes against it. That's not a problem. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it does. I think there's a potential in the system to do a lot of that automatically, obviously. So if we have an entry in the verifier box that says CS for Chris Allen or MC for Mick Chapman, and there's a hyperlink, then that could automatically be approved for upload to the HRS database. I think where it's more difficult is where someone's self-determining, as it were, and how that process works. Do we give people ratings or whatever? You do that automatically, don't you? That you look at, say, me and know the things that I can comfortably do, and things where you might think, hang on, that's a bit of a stretch for him. And so it might be, a lot of systems have these things like badges where you kind of gradually improve your expertise. We could definitely implement something like that, but I think for now it's kind of more in principle. Can people be allowed to self-verify certain species? And it might be there's a little tick box against things like that.
I mean, we might well think about something like that. Stuart was working a little while ago on an idea which was basically a quiz system with a series of tiers, which would allow people to ascend the tiers and show their abilities. Now, he actually got quite a long way with the structure of the platform, but the big problem we hit was actually populating with enough photographs to make it work. And that is just a massive job, which we've not overcome yet. I mean, it's something that ideally we ought to be probably doing something in a crowdsourcing way, but
what's the issue there then, Roger? Is that you don't have enough images to generate the quiz?
Well, no, there's no shortage of images. In order to generate the quiz, though, I need to go through every one of them.
Make sure
make sure they're right. And also one needs to go through every one of them and choose the right angles. So, for example, there may be angles on some species that are dead easy because you get the angle perfect. There'll be other angles which are someone with experience might well cope with, but someone without experience will have all sorts of problems with. So, and then of course there are species that become more and more straightforward as you get more experience, but at the very beginning are extremely difficult. So you're building up that whole infrastructure. It's something that one day maybe we'll get round to, but as you'll find with SyrphBoard, I mean, the reality is Andy and Yanis are doing this very much on a pro bono basis. So they're doing it when they've got time rather than doing it as a job of work. And the same thing applies to very nearly everything in biological recording. That it's not a job. It's a hobby, and people's times doing hobbies are very variable. And of course, there are many more jobs than there is time to do them. So you prioritize. That's life, But I hope that gives some feeling that, and certainly I would encourage people to start to be confident that they can do things. one of the things that we really must think about is we must give people the confidence to start to put names to things, and we must help them to understand where the difficulties lie rather than expect them to make a mistake. There are lots and lots of very capable people out there. Some of them more confidence than others.
And you can see that with people chipping in on the IDs. You know, it's not always down to, you know, Chris and Mick. I think a lot of, and others, you know, there's a lot of people who are able to identify many species and do, but ultimately somebody has to sort of be the trusted person. So I think this is something we'll definitely come back to, but the idea for now is to make sure that we have this process in place where we can move the records to a point where they can be submitted to the Hoverfly Recording Scheme database, and I think we'll focus on that as a priority next with you, Roger, to try and you know, make sure we've got that ready, because obviously that then allows the records to be moved on, because otherwise they'll sit in the system and it'll be very interesting for people to play with them, but they won't achieve our objectives. So that's a high priority for the next release.
Yeah, I mean, I feel that the important thing is that we start to use SyrphBoard and we start to get a feel as to the things that are the highest priority to spend some time on. And clearly, it's a very good way of making some progress in terms of standardizing the way the data actually arrive at the recording scheme, which is fantastic. And beyond that, I think that the real priority then is how do we provide something that gives people's feedback, and you know, that's, for me, that's really, really important, because the recording scheme shouldn't just be a black hole. It should be an interactive process that people get something out of.
Absolutely. And now we've got, well, you know, potentially we'll be having data coming in. We've got a mechanism for helping to display that information. So you need data to create those visualizations and maps. So hopefully we'll start to push some of that out as examples very soon as well.
Yeah, that's precisely it. It's let's get some data in and see how it works. And
yeah, I hope people use it.
Well, I'm sure they will. There'll be a proportion that will, and you know, this is advanced beta testing essentially, so it gives us some more experience.
Yeah, great. Okay, was there anything else, Roger, before we sign off?
I can't think of anything other than to say again, and I've mentioned it before, is a huge thank you to Andy and Yanis. You know, this has been a massive project, and I think, you know, the community really has to say thank you very much, guys. We really, really appreciate it.
You're welcome. I think it's really exciting, and you know, we're enjoying working on it, and yeah, we hope it has some value. So yeah, that's not a problem.
Brilliant.
Okay, thanks very much.